Good morning, YouTube, and welcome back to the channel. Obviously, we are elbow deep here in a project in the Gallardo, and I was torn whether or not I was going to do a video about this because it's already a tedious project. And if you've ever tried to video and edit and lighting and whatnot on a project, it just makes it take that much longer. Anyway, here we are. I think it's important enough to try to do a video for you guys about it. If you own a Gallardo, early Gallardo, if you're in the market for an early Gallardo, this is something you need to look at. If you already own one of these, it's not a matter of if you deal with this, it's when. And I'll show you what we're dealing with today. I've been putting this project off, honestly, since I bought the car. But we've got a bit of a hose issue going on. So we're going to change the 4 most notoriously problematic little coolant hoses. 2 of them are back here to the coolant expansion tank, and we've got 2 up front that we'll do after that that are kind of behind the battery and then run up to each of the radiators. The problem with these hoses is not only are they tiny, like 1/4 inch 6mm hoses, but they just become brittle over time. And as you guys can see, these things are just break like a potato chip. There's zero flexibility left to them. I knew the car needed this when I first bought it. I procrastinated as long as I could and gambled a bit, but this is definitely something that could leave you stranded on the side of the road. Like I said, I broke one of them off the expansion tank. I already had the materials purchased to do the job. I've just been putting it off because of how tedious it is. So anyway, I'm gonna muddle my way through this. A lot of times when I do these videos for you, sometimes I really have a good idea what I'm doing. Today, I will admit I do not. I'm gonna get into this as best I can and see if I can figure out the best methods. At the very least, maybe I'll show you guys some of what not to do. So when you get back here, obviously you got your coolant expansion tank. I've already moved all those carbon engine cover panels I put in here. You've got 2 little lines that run up here to the expansion tank, and as you can see, just busted off. This was the piece here that ran up there, and then the other side here, pulling that off as well. Of course, another piece breaking off as we speak, just dangling off. So what we need to do at this point, well, actually before I do that, let me show you what I'm going to go with. I've seen a lot of guys, you can get the hoses for these. You can buy them through Scuderia Parts, or I'm sure any of the other suppliers. You can get the exact part numbers and hoses. I'm not going to go that route. I'm going to do something a little bit different. You know, the problem with rubber is it kind of has a shelf life. I mean, that's why tires have a 10-year expiration date on them. They kind of lose their oils and things like that. They lose their flexibility, especially when they're back here in the engine. They're exposed to the heat cycling of the coolant system and the radiant heat from the motor. So what I'm actually going to do is replace ththese lines with some silicone coolant hoses. Let me show you what I've got here. So I went with this black HPS 1/4 inch ID 6mm ID Class A silicone coolant hose. I'm a big believer in the silicone coolant hoses. I really like the flexibility and the performance of them. They don't degrade quite like the rubber hoses do, and they're better at sustaining higher temperatures. So we're going to start to run with those. I've also got some brand new stainless hose clamps. So the issue with running this aftermarket silicone hose is, let's see if I can grab one of these. You know, it's a little bit larger, considerably larger OD than the original hose. Now getting back here in some already tight quarters, this may or may not become an issue. We'll see how this plays out as I try to snake this stuff through. I've got a couple different plans of attack, may or may not work. We'll see how it goes here. Like I said, I will note, before you tackle this job, if you don't already have them, I strongly recommend these hose pliers. Work wonders for pulling them off those little fittings there, because these things are about welded on there, especially if they haven't been removed for a long time. So to be able to grab that hose with these and give it a little bit of that twisting action helps break that loose to get it off. If they're as brittle as mine, they're still going to break anyway. Another technique I've used is to cut that with a razor knife, razor blade, whatever you can get up in there, and try and peel that off once you get it cut. The only downfall to doing that is you want to be really careful not to score any of these types of surfaces when you do that. So let's go ahead and get this expansion tank out of the way. I will go ahead and mention this is an 04, 05 cars. Your expansion tank's going to be a little bit different on the 06 plus cars, so that's why I'm not really showing you the removal process of that. You know, mine just got some alignment dowels here and a little hex bit bolt that holds it on there. Anyway, once you got that thing out of the way, regardless what year you're working on, you can see your hoses. So if you've never pulled it before, do know you do have a larger hose on the back side of that expansion tank as well. You've got the one that comes up here closest to the back of the car, actually runs down way back here behind the fuel filter and all that. It's gonna be hard to see. Some voids down there behind this quarter panel, and it runs down and actually goes down into the tunnel there under about the center of the car, where it connects into a hard line. From there, the hard line runs all the way up to the front of the car and then tees up there behind the battery, and that's where you have another one running off the left and right side up to your radiator. So for now, we're going to focus on the back. Once we get that done, then we'll go up front. So I'm going to tackle that one first, and we'll see where we end up. The other one, actually right here, where it broke off, came up here, snakes right around the fittings here, and you can kind of see it snake right down here along the firewall, and it ends up into the abyss back here behind the intake plenum. I've actually got a 13 millimeter socket on the fitting right now, just in case you guys want to know what size that is. That's going to be your bolt. Basically goes through a Banjo fitting sandwiched between a couple of crush washers and down into an aluminum coolant distribution block, let's call it, for lack of a better term. That one is going to take a little bit of strategy to work with and get to. I'm going to kind of work blindly. For that, I actually picked up an Endoscope, and I've got my laptop, so we're going to kind of do arthroscopic surgery, because there's no getting your hands down there to deal with that. So it might take some ingenuity and a little bit of trial and error to get that one in and out. Anyway, let's go ahead and start with this one first and move on. Alright guys, after an hour of struggling, there it is. So I cut that out of the video. I'll show you guys what I've done, that I don't know what the best plan of attack is, instead of showing you hour of struggling here. Nobody wants to watch a YouTube video of just watching a guy fumble with his camera and a hose. So I'll show you the best method I came up with. So initially my plan was maybe to try to butt connect to the hose and snake the new hose through, pulling the old hose out. That plan was absolute instant failure. For one, I had to annihilate the other end coming off of the hard line in the tunnel there underneath of the car. It's extremely difficult to get to. I'll get under there and show it to you in a second. And like I said, the hose was so welded on there, I just obliterated it, pulling it off in small chunks and pieces to get it off of there. Two, the line is so rigid that it just keeps breaking, so there's zero flexibility to snake it through. And then two, the larger diameter there of that silicone hose was definitely going to be a problem, because this was already tight. In fact, you can see here when you look at this hose from the factory, it was absolutely pinched about 90% of the way closed. Somewhere between the fuel tank there and the body of the car is where this thing runs. So I'll get under the car here, kind of show you guys what I did. So first I just took, I've got like 20 feet of this silicone hose. I didn't know how much to buy. It cost me like $60 for the hose, another $10, $15 for the fitting. So I'm not a whole ton of money into this project versus those factory hoses. And anyway, I took the hose here and I just started snaking it down in that void there back. It's even hard to even see in this video. It's probably not going to show up. But there's a couple small voids back here where that factory hose ran. Kind of goes behind the fuel filter there. And I just started stuffing it down there. And I don't know, I felt like I got a good foot, 18 inches or so, before it kind of hit something, snugged up. So then I got underneath of the car and I pulled off one of the triangular panels under here, and I was actually able to see that hose kind of popped out by the alternators. Let's get under there and I'll show you. So you get about 4 Phillips screws holding this little triangular panel on just underneath the alternator. Pulled that off and out of the way. And like I said, hopefully I get under here and get you guys a good visual. Kind of popped out right in this void here. There's your alternator right there. Kind of popped out here. So I was able to reach up and grab it with my hand here, even though it's tight, pull it through and get some more slack. And then it actually runs. I was able to tuck it up. I don't know if you guys can see or not. Up in here, there's a little bit of a void. Kind of goes behind this heat shielding up on top of the fuel tank there. And I was able to snake it through there. And hopefully you guys can see it pops out right there over the top corner here of the fuel tank. And that's the hard line it runs into, kind of directly above the drive shaft here. So again, not much room to get a hand up in here on either side. So that was extremely difficult to fight that old clamp and that old hose off of there. So be prepared for the fight. Once I got it off, obviously I was able to get the new one connected on there. And I believe we're following at least 90% of the factory routing. But that other hose, like I said, it was pinched up in there somewhere on top. So now that that hose is run, we're going to tackle the other one up there behind the firewall. Admittedly, I thought that would be the most challenging one. I guess we will find out, because this one was actually quite tedious as well. Much more so than I was prepared for. Alright guys, so now that we're done crawling around on the floor, which by the way, if you have a lift, unlike myself, it may make that project a night and day difference. Unfortunately for me, to get this car far enough off the ground to crawl around under there on my back is a nightmare. Anyway, we're up top here, and this is the setup we got going. So I've got my laptop set up here with my endoscope. Like I said, I don't know if you guys can see, I've got my 13mm socket on it. So there, pull it off of there so you can see it. There is our fitting, our hose, our clamp around the Banjo fitting and stuff there. Try to line things back up. I'm going to try and break that loose. If you don't have one of these, I strongly recommend investing in one. If not for this project, for several others. These are super cool. I just picked this one up off of Amazon. It was like $23 or so. Pretty cool. You can hook it up into your iPhone, your Android phone, your tablet, whatever device you want, your laptop. I'm obviously using my laptop so I can get a bit bigger picture here to see. Your Type-C and your Apple fittings and stuff there, as well as your USB. Pretty cool, a worthwhile investment, and hopefully will come in handy for this task for sure. Once I get that broken loose, I'm gonna work on snaking the rest of that brittle hose. Get a little light here, there we go, out of there. And then getting it back in may be a whole nother story, but one step at a time here. Looks like it broke pretty nice and easy. See if we can fish it out of here. So once I was sure I had it loose, I reached down there with one of these little magnets. We will pull that Banjo fitting and one of the crush washers out. Now we just got to get the hose with the Banjo fitting attached to it. Alright, not the Banjo fitting, the Banjo bolt with the crush washer attached to it. There should still be one crush washer underneath of that. It looks like I can kind of see the copper there, so we'll have to fish that out next. So for my next trick, I'm going to go on a bit of a fishing expedition and try and get that crush washer before I lose it, because I've wiggled it out of the way a little bit. So I've got my extension here with a little bit of warm tacky duct tape here on the end. I'm going to see if I can reach down there and grab that thing. Not that I'm going to reuse them, but I would like to make darn sure I'm going back in with the exact size. And I lost it. Pretty sure it did not hit the ground. Here's an example of just how hard these are on there. So when you can't actually get to them underneath the car and you're wrestling that can be a real bear. So out with the old, in with the new. Alright guys, so here we are with our fresh assembly, our new hose, ready to go back into the car. Still not completely sure of my strategy to wrestle this back in there. But this next move is going to be highly controversial and definitely experimental on my end. What I've done at this point to keep this assembly together is put a couple light drops of super glue in here and basically super glue this together, trying to keep it from falling apart until I can get it in there and get the thread started, at which point the super glue shouldn't hold and should just kind of break loose and allow things to torque down to spec without losing all the pieces down there on the floor between the firewall again. So let's get it in there and we'll see how that plays out. So here's the setup, attempt number one. I've got most of the hose routed. Alright guys, so I've been fighting it a little while. Put the camera down. I'll show you where we're at now. So as you can see, hold the camera still. See, I've got things threaded in. And I can see I've got it threaded down about hand tight all the way about to the base of the banjo there. So what I ended up doing is actually super gluing that entire fitting into my socket just so I could get that in there without it falling apart, get things lined up. And you want to be really, really careful. I had a little bit of trouble getting things just totally square. You don't want to cross thread or strip any of that. It's aluminum, that's why it's really important for me to be able to look at that and make darn sure I'm seated in as far as I can go by hand before I put a wrench or any sort of pressure on there. Alright, there she is, all tightened down. Now don't quote me, I don't know if there is or what the torque spec is for that. Keep in mind, it's a tiny little banjo bolt going into an aluminum housing, so I just went snug. If it leaks, I can always go tighter with it, but once you over tighten it, that is a problem. So we just went snug for now. I'm getting the coolant expansion tank back in. We're going to get these two lines hooked back up here, and I'm actually going to go ahead and pressure test this portion of the system before I even move on to the front. So if there's a leak there with something I've done back here, I'll know right where to look versus doing it all. I mean, I'll pressure test it again once we do the front, but I'm going to do it in two parts here since we're messing with 4 different hoses here, just to make sure that everything is copacetic with the back there first. Alright guys, lines hooked back up, expansion tank back in there and all secured. So now what we're going to do is go ahead, I'm going to pressure test the system, put about 10 pounds on it, let it sit overnight, make sure that we don't have any leaks in the back half of the system here before we get going. Relatively inexpensive to do. Get yourself a pressure tester kit. Comes in handy for all sorts of stuff. You can pick these up. I think you paid like $35 for this. Again, on Amazon, eBay, all that kind of stuff. And it just allows you to go ahead and put a vacuum on it. Pump it up manually. You got a release on the end here. Cool little system. Relatively quick and easy to do. Just pick the appropriate one and you'll thread it on there, and like I said, we'll pump that up, put about 10 pounds on it overnight. The one thing I totally forgot to mention is I previously drained the system. If you're going to tackle this job, I guess it's a good time to go ahead and do a coolant flush, coolant change, whatever you want to do. I'll crawl back under the car here since I missed it and show you guys exactly where to do that. I did that all beforehand. Again, you're going to need a couple 20mm crush washers for that. If I can remember, I'll attach the link to those. I would recommend using factory ones. They're not expensive, they're still easy to get, just so you know you're getting the absolute correct depth and size of those, so you don't over torque those aluminum bungs that are on there or anything like that. So we're going to make sure, you know, that we don't have any leaks in the system here. Like I said, it's just air in the system at this point, and this is a rather large system. I believe about 15 or so liters out. I believe it holds like 21 liters. Don't completely quote me on that, but since we're disconnecting these hoses, I've already got all the fluid out of the system, and we'll show you where that came from in a few moments. Quick disconnect there, and we'll just pump it up. So there we are, right exactly 10 pounds, guys, and I'm just going to leave this sit just like this overnight. I gotta go work this afternoon anyway. We're getting some snow and goofy weather out there, so by the time I come home tomorrow, should be able to hopefully still have that at 10 psi. If it's not, it means we've still got a leak in the system somewhere, and in which case I know the areas to suspect, obviously the areas where we've made connections and disconnections. So I would get in there with some soapy water in a spray bottle and maybe spray those down while you got suppression. If you see little bubbles blowing, you found your leak. So that's a quick, simple way if you do have a leak. Lord willing, we don't. I believe we've done everything properly here, but because this thing holds so much fluid, I just want to take the time to double check, because it would really suck to put all that fluid back in here only to find out you're weeping, seeping, leaking somewhere and then have to re-drain it. So in order to prevent that, this is cheap insurance. So there you are, guys. Since I so brainlessly forgot to point it out, those two 6mm hex bit plugs attached to those aluminum pipes, and those are aluminum bungs on there, are your drain points for the coolant system. Be prepared when you crack those. You are going to get a lot of fluid come gushing out of there. Like I said, it's a large capacity system, about 21 liters, so be prepared. Don't over torque those when you put them on. Like I said, I believe roughly 15 foot-pounds. I really would not go more as long as that seals. There you go, guys. There is the remnants of my two hoses. Absolutely annihilated, crispy like potato chips, hard as a rock. That was an absolute disaster waiting to happen. As much as I've been putting this project off and dreading doing it, it's so needed done. As these things approach, you know, with each passing year, additional age, I mean, mine's 21 years old now. This is just an age thing. It has nothing to do with mileage per se. Just like I said, age of the rubber, the heating and cooling just makes these things absolutely brittle. So if you haven't looked at yours or addressed it, I strongly would. So we're halfway there. We got two more to do in the front. Like I said, providing this holds overnight, then we'll move on to the front too. Lord willing, they should be a whole lot more simple than this. A little bit difficult to dig out, especially since I've got a frunk mounted amplifier I've got to unhook and some other junk up there to get to the battery even, but it should be a whole lot easier than what we just dealt with back here. This may encourage you to tackle the project yourself, or it very well may encourage you to pay a professional. Depends what your time and frustration is worth. Like I said, I'm about $75 into this entire project, aside from the cost of the coolant itself that I'm replacing since I drained it and don't know when it was ever done last. If you want to put the same coolant back in, you could have done the project for, like I said, $75. Factory hoses are going to definitely cost you a little bit more, as they've got their markup. But I know from experience, the very first Gallardo I looked at had some recent services because it was a dealership. They'd actually sent it to a local exotic shop, and they had replaced just these two hoses back here on the coolant reservoir, had receipts for it, and they used aftermarket hoses as well when they did that, and the bill just for changing those two hoses was $350. So depends what your time and money is worth. Alright, here we are next day. It's been sitting about 24 hours now, and as you guys can see, we haven't lost anything. So I'm going to call the back half of this a success. Halfway done. Get the back all buttoned up and looking fresh. Now we're moving on up front. If you've never pulled this before, obviously, like I said, I had to get my amp and I got some junk out of the way here. We're going to rip off and pull off the weather stripping around the frunk here, and then you've got 4 little hex bits in each side here, and then we should be able to lift the frunk right on out of here. So we'll skip to that part to speed this up a little bit. Alright, front liner out. One thing I did forget to mention, don't forget to pull out or disconnect the frunk lamp before you go yanking on things. So anyway, once we get that out of the way, now we can see in here the little tiny hose that runs from the top of each radiator down in there, and from what I can tell, these feel pretty brittle as well, just like the ones in the back. So I'm glad we're tackling this. Now we can pull the battery out of the way, and I believe these run down here and kind of tee back in here behind it. Hopefully we can access that much better with that battery out of the way. So I'll give that a quick yank, grab your 10mm, get those cables off and get that battery out of the way. So slight change in plans. There seems to be enough slack in the battery cables. I just slid that down here, let it sit on this plastic liner out of the way. Got one little Torx here. I'm just going to pull this plastic piece out of the way and see if this will allow me to gain enough access to get back there without having to disconnect the battery. Like I said, being lazy, because the problem is every time I do that, you got to reset your key fobs and everything else. So this will either work or it won't. I believe this is where we need to access here, and of course our clamps are oriented the complete wrong direction, so that'll be fun. So definitely tight quarters under here, but I am able to get in here with my 7mm and undo these clamps ever so slowly but surely. And this, luckily there is a little bit of flex here, definitely not room for a socket, but I should be able to get this side as well. As you guys can see, it's definitely tight. It's right underneath of the frame. Oops, right in there. But yeah, we'll get those work loose, and then we'll worry about getting them off. And then obviously I will orient the new clamps so I can access them right in this little void here much easier. Same strategy as before, definitely tight, and these are fragile, breaking off just like the other ones in the back did. Other than that, they are easily accessible, and routing and snaking the hose should be a night and day difference. Got a couple zip ties to cut, and then boom, we're right up top here where we can easily work and access that. This is where these pliers really come in handy. Now we can break that fragile little one out of there and get the new hose routed in there. Well, as you can see, it's like the rear coming out in pieces, but either way, one side out, we'll put the new side in. Unfortunately, I can't tell you guys exactly how long these hoses are because they are all coming out in pieces. What I can say is I bought two 10-foot lengths of the silicone hose, 20 feet in total. I had roughly a foot left in the back when I did those two. Now granted, I left a little bit more slack maybe than the factory ones had come with. And again, I'm just routing the pieces here, as you can see, and cutting them to length. These are definitely much shorter than the rear. We'll see exactly what we have left when we get done here, and I'll let you guys know. And here we are, two nice new little hoses run in the front. I definitely overbought on the hose a little bit. Now they got all the old stuff out, so I've got exactly 1 foot left over out of the 10 foot I bought for the rear. And for the front, I've got a 6 foot section left over. So I could have got away with 15 feet of hose instead of 20, just for reference in case you guys choose to go this route. But I'd rather have too much than too little for sure. Now that we got to this point, I'm going to go ahead and pressure test the front half of the system again just to verify. Now that we've had this apart, there are no leaks before I reassemble all the cosmetics. We'll get this thing refilled with coolant, and Lord willing, we will be good to go. Here is our reward. That is what's left of all 4 hoses at this point. Absolute shrapnel. As far as degree of difficulty goes, I would definitely rate the rear here about an 8 out of 10. Front, 3. Night and day difference. Able to bang that out in less than an hour. These took better part of an entire day to bang that all out. So, good luck to you guys. And here we are with the completion of another successful pressure test of the system, I am going to call this mission a success and complete. I need to finish fueling the system, obviously. I'm going to double check here for leaks one last time. Visually, nothing to be found so far. Everything looks really good. And we're going to get the car fired up and cycle it a few times. Obviously, don't forget to recheck your fluid after you do that. Anyway, I hope some of you guys may have found this video helpful. At the very least, maybe I showed you what not to do, or maybe I've encouraged you to pay a professional. Either way, wasn't an expensive job other than my time. Was able to tackle this myself, like I said, for about $75. So anyway, hope you guys liked the video. Hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already. I've got more stuff to come. The Rev 10 paddles just showed up the other day, so that will be the next project on the Gallardo to come. So stay tuned. Thanks again, guys. We'll see you on the next one.